The room was thick with tension, the air heavy with the kind of silence that only occurs when two sides are seconds away from tearing each other apart. On one side of the circular chamber sat the Aurelian delegation, their crystalline armor shimmering under the harsh lights. Tall and elegant, their leader's face was fixed in a perpetual sneer, as if everything around him reeked of inferiority. Across from them, the Drevians bristled with barely contained aggression. Their hulking forms were built for war, their glowing red eyes flickering with primal rage. In the middle of it all sat the human diplomat, slouched casually in his chair, arms crossed. He looked out of place, a creature of soft flesh and plain attire in a room filled with alien splendor. Yet his demeanor was anything but ordinary. There was no fear, no deference in his posture. Instead, there was an aura of quiet confidence, the kind that made observers uneasy because they couldn't quite tell if it was warranted or sheer bravado. "I still don't understand why the humans are here," the Aurelian leader said, his voice dripping with disdain. "Surely a species barely a century into interstellar exploration has little to offer." "Agreed," growled the Drevian commander, his massive hands clenched into fists. "We should let our weapons settle this, not waste time on words." The human raised a hand as if signaling a bartender. "Hold my beer," he said with a grin. The phrase was met with confusion. The translator drones hummed, struggling to render the idiom into something comprehensible. The Aurelian general leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "What did he say?" "Does it matter?" the Drevian commander growled.
"He's stalling. Humans are good at that."
"Oh, I'm not stalling," the diplomat replied, leaning forward. "I'm just giving you both a chance to reconsider before you do something incredibly stupid." The room went still. The Drevians shifted uneasily, their predatory instincts telling them something was off. The Aurelians exchanged glances, their crystalline features betraying a flicker of doubt. "You see," the diplomat continued, "humans have a bit of a reputation. We're the species that finds solutions in the places no one else thinks to look. We don't always play by the rules, but we always get results. So when I say hold my beer, what I mean is sit back and watch while I solve the problem you two have been too stubborn to fix." The Drevian commander snarled, but there was hesitation in his voice. "You think you can intimidate us with words? Intimidate you? No," the diplomat said, his grin widening. "But I can make you think. And thinking, Commander, has never been your strong suit." The insult landed like a hammer. The Drevian slammed his fist onto the table, the sound echoing through the chamber. "Careful, human. You walk a fine line." "That's the thing about humans," the diplomat replied calmly. "We've been walking fine lines for centuries. Survival isn't new to us. Negotiation isn't new to us. And war? Well, let's just say we've had plenty of practice." The Aurelian leader's sneer faltered. "You talk as if your species is more than a minor inconvenience. Yet here you are unarmed, surrounded by forces far superior to anything your kind could muster." "Superior?" The diplomat chuckled. "Maybe on paper. But in practice, you'd be surprised how often the underdog comes out on top. We're good at adapting, General. And we're very, very good at turning other people's strengths into weaknesses." There was a pause, the kind that stretched just long enough to make the aliens wonder if they'd underestimated their opponent. The diplomat let the silence linger, knowing full well that doubt was his greatest weapon. Finally, the Aurelian leader spoke, his voice cautious. "You claim to have solutions, human. What exactly are you proposing?" "I'm proposing you stop thinking in terms of domination and start thinking in terms of survival," the diplomat said. "Because let's face it, neither of you can afford to keep this war going. The Drevians are running out of resources, and the Aurelians are running out of soldiers. You're both on the edge of collapse, and the only thing keeping you from falling over is the hope that the other side collapses first." The words hung in the air like a knife. The Drevians shifted uncomfortably, their confidence visibly shaken. The Aurelians looked at each other, their crystalline faces unreadable but clearly troubled. "You think you know our position," the Drevian commander growled, but his tone lacked the fire it had before. "You think you can see through us?" "I don't think, Commander," the diplomat said, leaning back in his chair. "I know. And if you're smart, You'll listen to me before it's too late. For the first time since the meeting began, neither side had a retort. The human diplomat had managed to do what seemed impossible: silence the room without firing a single shot. The tension in the chamber was now palpable, like a coiled spring ready to snap. The human diplomat's words had planted seeds of doubt in both factions, and that doubt was beginning to take root. He watched them carefully, noting every twitch, every glance exchanged between the Aurelian and Drevian leaders. They were trying to gauge each other's reactions, unsure if the human was bluffing or if he truly had insights they couldn't see. The diplomat tapped his fingers on the table, the sound loud in the uneasy silence. "You know," he began, as though sharing a casual observation, "there's a peculiar thing about power. It's never as secure as you think it is. Especially when someone knows how to tilt the balance." The Aurelian leader narrowed his eyes. "What are you implying, human?" "I'm saying your entire strategy is based on assumptions," the diplomat replied. "Assumptions about each other. Assumptions about yourselves. And most importantly, assumptions about us." He pointed to himself with a wry smile. "That's your first mistake." The Drevian commander's lip curled in disdain. "Your kind is barely out of its cradle. What could you possibly understand about wars?" "Plenty," the diplomat shot back, his tone sharper now. "We've fought wars on our own soil, wars among ourselves, wars that lasted centuries. We've seen the rise and fall of empires, the devastation of entire nations. We learned early on that war is never just about weapons or numbers. It's about perception, leverage, and knowing exactly when to pull the right string." The room grew colder. Both alien factions were listening now, their skepticism beginning to waver. The diplomat leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial tone. "Do you know what's interesting about this little standoff of yours? You're both convinced the other side is the bigger threat. But the truth? You're both far more vulnerable than you realize." The Aurelian stiffened, their crystalline forms flashing faintly, as though in warning. "What do you mean?" the general demanded. "For starters," the diplomat said, his tone casual but deliberate, "the Drevians are running on fumes. Your supply lines are overextended, your troops are exhausted, and your morale is crumbling. Oh, I know you've tried to keep it quiet, but the cracks are showing. Your warriors may be strong, but they're not invincible." The Drevian commander bristled, but before he could retort, the diplomat turned to the Aurelians. "And you," he said, pointing a finger, "you're no better. Sure, you've got technology on your side, but you're bleeding resources faster than you can replace them. Your fleets are scattered, your leadership is fractured, and your soldiers are starting to question whether this war is even worth it. You've backed yourselves into a corner, and you don't even realize it." The Aurelian general's composure cracked, his crystalline features dimming slightly. The Drevian commander, meanwhile, looked as though he wanted to crush the table in his fists, but was held back by something else, a flicker of doubt. "You're bluffing," the Drevian snarled. "Am I?" the diplomat asked, raising an eyebrow. "You think I came into this room without knowing exactly what I was dealing with? Humans don't play games we can't win. And right now, I'm holding cards you haven't even seen yet." The Drevian commander hesitated, glancing at his Aurelian counterpart. That was exactly what the diplomat wanted, a crack in the foundation of their mutual animosity. The diplomat leaned back again, his tone shifting to something softer, almost conversational. "Here's the thing. Humans are good at chaos. We thrive in it. You both look at us and see a species that shouldn't even be here, but you underestimate what we can do when our backs are against the wall. And trust me, we've learned to make chaos work for us in ways you can't even imagine." The Aurelian leader's voice was quieter now, almost wary. "You speak as though you've already won." "Not yet," the diplomat admitted, spreading his hands. "But I will if you force me to. And believe me, you don't want that. What I'm offering here is a way out, a chance to end this without either of you losing everything. Because that's what's going to happen if this war keeps going. You'll tear each other apart, and when the dust settles, all that will be left is ashes. And do you know who'll be there to pick up the pieces?" The silence was deafening. "Us," the diplomat finished, his voice calm but firm. "Because while you've been fighting over scraps, humanity has been watching, learning, and preparing. We've seen your strengths, your weaknesses, your blind spots. We know exactly where to push, where to pull, and when to step back and let you destroy yourselves. That's the game you're playing right now, whether you realize it or not. The only question is how it ends. The Drevian commander's fists unclenched slightly. The Aurelian leader shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The diplomat didn't give them a chance to recover. So here's the deal. You can keep fighting, keep bleeding each other dry, and we'll step in when you're both too weak to stop us. Or you can end this war now, work together, and avoid a future where humanity is the last species standing. Your choice. The room was silent again, but this time, it wasn't just tension that filled the air, it was the weight of realization. The seeds of doubt had blossomed into something far more powerful. Fear. The diplomat let the silence stretch, knowing the weight of his words was settling over the room like a storm cloud. He didn't look at either leader directly now. Instead, his gaze swept the entire chamber as if addressing an invisible audience. His tone changed, sharper now, deliberate and pointed. "Do you know what makes humans different?" he asked. "We're not the strongest. We're not the fastest. Our technology isn't the most advanced, and we certainly don't have the biggest armies. But what we do have is a talent for finding the cracks in any system and prying them wide open." The Drevian commander shifted uneasily, his glowing eyes narrowing. "Is this another empty threat? Words don't win wars, human." "No, but they can stop one," the diplomat replied smoothly. "And right now, I'm giving you a chance to rethink every assumption you've made about us. You both walked into this war thinking it would be over quickly, that it would end with one of you standing victorious over the other. But wars don't end that cleanly. They end in rubble, famine, and desperation. And you're closer to that edge than you realize." The Aurelian leader leaned forward, his crystalline features tense. "If you have something to say, human, say it. Enough with your games." The diplomat smirked. "Oh, I'm not playing games. I'm setting the board." He tapped the table between them, drawing their attention. "Here's the reality. We've been watching this war unfold from the sidelines. You think humanity has just been sitting quietly, hoping to avoid the crossfire?
No.
We've been learning, cataloging, and preparing." The diplomat's voice grew firmer, his words cutting through the tension like a blade. "While you've been bleeding each other dry, we've been testing ways to turn your greatest strengths against you. Take the Aurelians, for example. Your reliance on energy-based weapons is impressive, but it's also predictable. We've developed countermeasures, ways to neutralize your energy fields and render your fleets powerless in minutes." The Aurelian general's crystalline eyes flickered faintly, betraying a flicker of unease. The diplomat didn't pause. "And the Drevians," he continued, turning toward the hulking warrior, "your biological resilience is legendary. You can march through fire, endure harsh environments, and outlast most enemies. But we've found your weak spot too. A simple biochemical agent, one we've engineered to disrupt your neural pathways without killing you. Imagine an entire army brought to its knees without a single shot fired." The Drevian commander growled, but there was a hesitation in his movement, a flicker of doubt behind his anger. "I call it a contingency," the diplomat said, leaning back in his chair. "Because the last thing humanity wants is to use these measures. We don't want to fight, but we're not afraid to, and we're certainly not afraid to win. What I'm offering you both is an opportunity to step back from the brink and choose a path where no one has to lose everything." The Aurelians and Drevians exchanged glances, their skepticism still evident, but now mingled with uncertainty. "You're bluffing," the Aurelian leader said at last, though his voice lacked conviction. "If humans had such capabilities, you'd have already used them." The diplomat's smile didn't falter. "Bluffing? That's an interesting word. But let me ask you this. Are you willing to bet everything on the possibility that I am? Because that's what's at stake here, everything. Your armies, your fleets, your homeworlds. One wrong move, and it all burns." The Drevian commander's voice was low, almost a growl. "Why are you telling us this? If you truly had the power to end us, why not do it?" "Because humanity doesn't conquer," the diplomat said simply. "We don't seek domination. We seek balance, cooperation, progress." You too, for all your posturing, have forgotten what's truly at stake here. It's not about victory. It's about survival, not just for your species, but for all of us. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. The diplomat pressed his advantage, his voice dropping to a near whisper. You think humanity is your enemy? We're not. We're your wake-up call. You've spent so long fighting each other that you've forgotten what it means to build, to grow, to thrive. And if you keep this up, you won't have a future left to fight for. The Drevian commander looked at the Aurelian leader, his expression torn between anger and contemplation. The Aurelian general, for his part, seemed to be calculating, weighing the diplomat's words against the risks. Finally, the diplomat broke the silence. This war doesn't have to end in bloodshed. It can end in something far more powerful, an alliance. One that doesn't just save your people, but strengthens all of us. Humanity has seen what happens when civilizations collapse. We've lived through it ourselves. Don't let history repeat itself on a galactic scale. The tension in the room was still thick, but it had shifted. The diplomat could see the cracks forming, the doubt taking root. He didn't need to push any further. The decision was now theirs to make. The room felt like it was holding its breath. The two alien leaders, once so certain of their positions, now sat in a fragile silence, their confidence eroded by the human's words. The diplomat didn't press them further, letting the weight of his argument sink in. He knew when to stop talking and let doubt do the rest. But he wasn't finished yet. He straightened in his chair, his voice calm but carrying an undeniable edge. I know you're both wondering if this is some elaborate trick. You're questioning every assumption you've made about humanity and every decision that's led you here. That's good. You should be questioning everything, because this is the moment that defines your future. The Aurelian leader broke the silence first, his tone wary but tinged with curiosity. And what, human, does your kind gain from this? If we stop fighting, if we form this alliance you speak of, what's in it for you? The diplomat tilted his head slightly, his expression thoughtful. Survival. Stability. The chance to live in a galaxy where war isn't the default setting. Humanity doesn't thrive in chaos for the sake of it. We adapt to it because we have to. But if we can avoid it, if we can help create something better, why wouldn't we? The Drevian commander's brow furrowed, his glowing eyes narrowing. You make it sound noble, but we've seen enough wars to know there's always an ulterior motive. What aren't you saying? The diplomat met the commander's gaze, without flinching. You're right to be suspicious. No species offers help without some form of self-interest. And I won't lie to you, an alliance benefits humanity, too. It gives us a seat at the table, a chance to be part of something larger than ourselves. But that's not a weakness. That's how civilizations grow. Together. What you see as ulterior motive, I see as shared opportunity. The Aurelian leader leaned back, his crystalline features flickering faintly, as if deep in thought. And if we refuse? If we call your bluff and continue this war? The diplomat's expression hardened, and for a moment, his calm exterior cracked just enough to reveal the steel beneath. Then you'll lose everything. Not because humanity intervenes, but because your pride will destroy you. The resources you've burned, the lives you've wasted, they won't come back. And when you're too weak to stand, something else will rise to take your place. Maybe it's humanity. Maybe it's something far worse. But make no mistake, if you choose to keep fighting, you won't survive the aftermath. The Drevian commander's jaw tightened, his massive hands flexing as if struggling to contain his frustration. You speak as if you've already won. The diplomat's smile returned, small but unyielding. Winning isn't about crushing your opponent. It's about understanding the bigger picture. And right now, the bigger picture is that none of us can afford to lose. Not the Drevians. Not the Aurelians. Not humanity. This war isn't just your problem. It's a threat to every species in this galaxy. The longer it drags on, the more unstable everything becomes. Trade collapses. Borders dissolve. Pirates and opportunists pick the bones of what's left. Is that the future you want? The Aurelian leader's crystalline form dimmed slightly, a subtle but telling sign of doubt. The Drevian commander, usually so quick to anger, seemed to wrestle with himself, his silence speaking volumes. "You have a choice," the diplomat said, his tone softening but losing none of its urgency. "End this war now and start building something better, or let it consume you both. Humanity is offering you a way out, not because we're weak, but because we're strong enough to see the value in cooperation. That's your lesson here. Strength isn't just about weapons or armies. It's about knowing when to fight and when to stop." The silence that followed was different this time. It wasn't the tense, charged quiet of before, but something deeper, a moment of genuine contemplation. The alien leaders looked at each other, their postures less hostile, their expressions less rigid. The diplomat let them sit in that silence, knowing that the hardest part of his job was already done. He had planted the idea, shifted their perspective, and shown them a path forward. Whether they chose to take it or not was beyond his control, but he could see the cracks in their resolve, the uncertainty in their once unshakable positions. Finally, he rose from his seat, his movements deliberate but unhurried. "I've said my piece," he said, his voice steady. "The rest is up to you. But remember this, humanity doesn't need this alliance to survive. We'll find a way, just like we always have. The question is whether you'll find a way, too, or whether your pride will leave you both with nothing." With that, he turned and walked toward the exit, leaving the two leaders to grapple with the weight of his words. The decision was theirs now, but the human diplomat knew one thing for certain: the galaxy wouldn't forget this day. And neither would they.